Okay, good afternoon, everyone here in India, and good morning to those of you who are joining from Europe. My name is Samrat Kumar. I am the country representative of Euraxess India, and on behalf of Euraxess and the delegation of the European Union to India, we very warmly welcome you on this cold afternoon here in Delhi to our webinar on the European Research Council grants. The European Research Council grants are one of the most prestigious grants a researcher can apply for and obtain. And we are very happy that today we have extremely good speakers and experts here who will guide you through the proposal process, the application process. And I want to introduce our three main speakers today. I will start with the order of the presenters. First of all, Dr. Vivek Dham, who is the senior advisor at the Research Innovation section at the European delegation here in India. And Vivek has been dealing with the EU-India cooperation since 2013. And he works very strongly on delivering the EU's vision for a stronger, deeper research and innovation partnership with India. Vivek himself is a researcher, has a background as a researcher in climate change and marine ecosystems, and has been, of course, been studying also in Europe during his PhD time. And so Vivek, a warm welcome to this webinar. Our second speaker of today, which we are very happy and proud of, is Dr. Bodhisattva Chattopadhyaya. Dr. Bodhisattva is Associate Professor in Global Cultural Studies at the Department of Cultural Studies and Oriental Languages at the University of Oslo, Norway. A very good morning to you, Bodhi, from joining us from Oslo. Bodhi is ERC grantee. He has been the principal investigator of the starting grant project named Co-Futures, Pathways to Possible Presence, which is a very interesting project, and he will tell us more about it. And he also runs a game research lab, the Holodeck, at the University of Oslo. Bodhi is also an Imaginary College Fellow at the Center for Science and the Imagination at the Arizona State University in the US. And he's also editor-in-chief of Fafnir, Nordic Journal of Science Fiction and Fantasy Research. And he has and the series co-editor Routledge Studies in Global Genre Fiction. Our last speaker, and I think a very, very interesting perspective she will bring to us, is Dr. Maria Attard. Dr. Maria Attard is Associate Professor at the Head of Department of Geography and Director of the Institute for Climate Change and Sustainable Development at the University of Malta. A very good morning to you, Maria, joining us from Malta. Maria has published over 50 journal articles and book chapters. She has extensive experience in project management, and she has participated in over 30 projects funded locally, internationally. And she is also part of numerous panels, evaluation panels in Europe, in the Netherlands, in Belgium, and she's also an evaluator for the European Research Council. She holds a BA and an MA in Geography from the University of Malta, and she completed her PhD in Transport Geography at the University College London. So as you see, we have a great lineup of speakers, so I won't take much more of your time. Just want to give you a few house rules for this webinar, which are that we will have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentations. So if you have any questions to the speakers, please write them into the chat box or the Q&A session and the Q&A box, and we will collect those questions and share it with the presenters in the Q&A session. If your question has not been answered, then please don't worry. We will also try to answer them post the webinar. This webinar will also be recorded and made available to you, as well as the presentations. So don't worry, all the presentations will be made available to you after this webinar. So that's enough from my side for the introduction. I would now ask Dr. Vivek Dham to just briefly introduce the ERC and its grant schemes to the audience, and also possibilities for Indian researchers to participate in existing ERC projects. Thank you, Vivek.
Thank you, Samrat. I'm going to share my slide. Are you able to see the full screen?
Yes, Vivek.
Okay. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of European Research Council, delegation of European Union, and the Euraxess, I welcome you all to this webinar. I'm going to give you a brief information about the implementing arrangement scheme. But prior to that, I will just give you what ERC means. But there are eminent speakers after me who will give you the details of what ERC is all about. So the ERC is the European Research Council established by the European Commission in way back in 2007. And it funds the individual researchers all over the world for a longer duration with the principle of high risk, high gain projects. They are looking into frontiers of researchers. Basically, they are looking at best of the best researchers across the world to compete for this particular program. This is again a bottom-up approach. What does it mean? That it funds all the research disciplines, which like life sciences, physical sciences, engineering, and social science and humanities. ERC has, as of today, thousands of researchers across the world had benefited from this program. It is very prestigious and very highly regarded across the world. It is open, its criteria for selection is excellence. The excellence of researcher and excellence of the project. That is the only criteria. I think there is Dr. Maria is there who will brief about what the evaluation means and what they are looking into the project proposals. So this particular initiative is open to all the researchers. If you are not even from the Europe, you can be part of this. You can spend 50% of your research time in Europe and 50% in India. So it is very flexible scheme. It is run by the scientists and for the scientists. So it is less bureaucratic and it is very flexible in terms of the thing. The program has 5 major schemes, that is starting grant, consolidated and advanced grant, proof of concept and synergy grant. But I will just give you a word about each program. The starting grant is meant for the younger researchers who finish the PhD and 2 to 7 years of experience, can had published a research article independently other than his project director. So those researchers can apply for starting grant, and it could be from 1.5 to 2 million euros. It is 5 years program. Consolidated is much more, little bit for more experienced researchers which has 7 to 12 years of research experience. So those people are showing independent skills of doing research, management skills of project proposals. So they can apply for consolidated grant, and it could range from 2 to 2.7 million euros. Advanced grant is much more for the senior researchers, and they can apply for 2.5 to 3 million euros funding for 3 years. Proof of concept is basically for the ERC grantees who are looking for taking this knowledge to a market-oriented or startup. They can go for this concept of proof. But Synergy grant, which is relaunched in 2018, and it is quite an international dimension, because if you have an idea or a concept which is very ambitious, but it needs an additional expertise and additional experts from different countries, they can go for the Synergy grant, which is open for 6 years, and you can form a consortium to 2 to 4 researchers across the world. And it is slowly picking up, but I urge the Indian researchers to look into this particular scheme as well. The ERC, as I already meant, is a brand. It is an excellence. It is an world-recognized institutions or the scheme, which is the European Commission under the Horizon 2020 is funding around 13 billion euros. And as of today, there are 84 nationalities across the world and benefited from that. more than 10,000 researchers are funded under the ERC. There are 75,000 ERC members or research team members across the world are participating, and huge number of publications are already published. ERC had initiated an additional scheme, which is not known very well, and that also shows its international dimension and inclusiveness. This scheme is called as Implementing Arrangement. This scheme is launched in 2012 by ERC, and this is meant mainly to support the non-European researchers who are already selected by their own national agencies under the national program. They could come and join the ERC grant for temporarily for 6 to 12 months. And this particular grant, this particular arrangements are made along with 12 countries and 16 funding agencies from those 12 countries. With India, we have a grant agreement with the DST SERB, that is Science and Engineering Research Board, and ICSSR, that is for Social Sciences and Humanities. So the India has 2 funding agencies had an agreement with ERC. As of today, there are more than 400 researchers across the world had benefited from this implementing arrangement scheme. This is basically the initiative by the non-European researchers to take in. I will briefly tell you how it works basically. Basically, the SERB grantee, that is any student or any PhD, postdoc or early research career fellow who are currently having a SERB grant are only eligible to apply for this particular grant. So the SERB provides the air ticket to the researcher. It is open only to STEM, that is science, technology, engineering, and maths field. And the researchers from the PhD, postdoc, or early career researchers could go for 6 to 12 months under this scheme. The SERB provides the travel expenses for the individual as well as his family, and the host ERC lab normally provides the per diem to the visiting scientists. It is for 6 to 12 months, and this information is also available on the SERB website. The second scheme is specifically to cover the social science and humanities. That is why we had recently signed an agreement with the Indian Council of Social Science and Research. I think last month we had signed this agreement. It is open to PIs who are already had ongoing project with ICSSR grant. That is, they can be principal investigator, senior fellows, postdocs are eligible to apply for this particular scheme, and they can visit the ERC lab or could be with the ERC lab up to 2 months maximum. So again, the ICSSR provides the travel expenses, visa, and insurance, and the per diems will be provided by the ERC host lab. So this information is already will be coming to the different teams of the ICSSR and SERB in, I think next month we will be having this implementing arrangement. How does it work? Basically, the ERC launches call for expression of interest to all the beneficiaries, all the grantees of ERC to express their interest if they are ready to host any, they are ready to take any India non-European researchers into their team for a shorter time. They express their interest, they inform the ERC, their availability and the interest, and that interest is communicated to the non-European funding agencies. In case of India, it is SERB and ICSSR, it is informed to them. Those project officers from SERB and ICSSR will inform only to the active grantees in India that this scheme is available, because it has a lot of confidential data available, because his email addresses, all the thematic areas are expressed in those documents. So only given to a targeted people. So the PIs from India could go through that particular list and communicate with the ERC grantees of their choice. They make discussions and they make a program for a shorter period. And then if they agree, they issue expression of letter to the Indian entity, which they submit to the Indian funding agency, and later on they can go for the short-term visit. That is what I just briefly explained. The letter of intent is has to be the entire project and visit has to be discussed by the Indian visiting researchers and the ERC PI, the main investigator. There is no interference from the ERC in selection. It is national funding agency who make a final decision on the Indian researchers visit and the project. If all goes well, you will be visiting in summer if the COVID is under control. So hopefully the situation will be improved in next 6 months. These are the additional information which you can get it from the website. The slides will be shared with you. Otherwise, you can contact us. We will be more than happy to help you out. I think I will stop it here. Samrat, over to you.
Thank you so much, Vivek, for this very good overview and introduction about the European Research Council and its grants, and also, of course, this great opportunity for Indian researchers to join ERC existing projects through the implementing agreements, which I think is great, also especially for researchers in social sciences, that there is this opportunity now with this new implementing agreement with the ICSSR. So I would like now ask Dr. Bodhisattva to share his insights, like the view from inside, an ERC grantee, a very interesting topic. And of course, we want to know now, like, Bodhi, how was the process? What were the challenges? How did you get this grant? And please do share your screen, your presentation with us now.
That working fine?
Yeah, great.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Samrat, for inviting me, and it's really a pleasure to be able to talk a bit about about the whole process. I have not had much of a chance this year, partly because of COVID, but I think some of these things, some of these insights, are really useful for those who are applying for these projects. So what I've tried to do over here is. So I have divided this whole thing into phases. Like, how did I, start conceptualizing or thinking through the problem? Then what was the process that I used for writing or preparing the application? And then finally, I also talk a bit about the interview stage for this. So before anything else, CoFutures is really like, you can visit cofutures.org, which is the website that's listed over there at the bottom. It's kind of a big project which is trying to basically answer everything, but more specifically, it is trying to use speculative fiction across different media, so films, books, video games, and so on, in addressing what I call the global challenges of our time, including climate change, demographic change, and technological change. So it's a pretty broad project. So there's more details available on the website. And if you have any further questions, just write to me. So I have about, I think, 20 minutes. So I'm gonna go relatively fast. And if you have any questions, just please raise them using the Q&A button. So that we can get to them later. So the first phase is what I would call the pre-ERC stage. And this is kind of interesting because I got the ERC in one shot. So I applied and I got it. But it isn't quite as smooth a process as it appears. So I had tried several times with the National Research Council over here in Norway, where I'm based, with the NFR, Forskningsrådet. And the thing is, those applications didn't work. So I'd applied thrice in 3 different kinds of schemes and so on, and they didn't work. And it's not so much because the application was bad, because they were ranked pretty highly, but it's because of the general state of grant applications. It's really quite, it's really a really low success rate for grant applications, including for the ERC, but even worse for the national research councils. So the first thing I kind of want to say is that in case you're applying and in case it doesn't work, that's not the end of it. You can try again. So because it does not necessarily reflect on your project. It's just because grants are really hard to get. And the next thing I would say is, this whole idea of going big with idea and going small with implementation is something that I kind of learned through writing those NFR applications. And I will get to the NFR very briefly because I managed to get that grant too, along with the ERC. So I'll mention that briefly. But the one of the big things that I learned writing those applications for the NFR is that the idea can be really grand. It can be really big and all of that. But when one is writing the grant application, you have to be really, really specific and really, really concerned with the implementation part of it. So you can have the greatest idea in the world, but if you're not focused on implementation, then there will be a problem. And I think Dr. Attad will tell us a lot more from the evaluator's perspective what that means. But this is also my experience with applying with the NFR, and then of course, thinking with the ERC. The third question that I kind of want to put in there is that are people not yet ready for the really crazy stuff? And this is particularly important for the ERC, because ERC prioritizes things that are basically groundbreaking, that have the potential to change entire disciplines and all of that. So it is crazy stuff, right? So if you're going to say that I'm a 30-year-old person coming in and I'm going to just change everything that's going on in the discipline, it seems almost a bit too bold a claim to make, which a lot of us are not quite trained to make. As scientists, we are trained to be quite the opposite, right? That look, we're gonna research this. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. Yeah, I don't know. So we are much more hesitant, and that's also sometimes we tend to think that other people are not yet ready for the crazy stuff. But the ERC kind of wants the crazy stuff, and this is kind of important to remember. So I'll come back to this notion of the really crazy stuff in a bit. So this is kind of the pre-ERC stage. So the pre-ERC stage for me was I think several failed grant applications, tossing and turning the idea around in my head for a very long time. So almost 2.5 years of thinking involved in it. And I learned a lot through the failures and the feedback. So that's important. The ERC stage is kind of the first stage of preparing the proposal. So this is why I call it the drafting stage, when you're like putting together the first outline of your application. And the ERC is kind of interesting. There are two different kinds of applications that you write. There's a shorter one and there's a longer one. There's a short description and a long description. And we'll hear all about that probably from Dr. Attad, so I'm not going to go into that. But the drafting stage is kind of this idea that you have to present. It's kind of a short synopsis. It's 5 pages. And that's the 5 pages you have to basically convince people that your project deserves to be read. The full idea deserves to be read. So at that stage, it's just this brief description and your CV, and you kind of need to push ahead with those things. So first, very important tip is be yourself. It is the easiest way forward. You with the ERC, with anything else, like, I don't know how it works with other things, but with the ERC, you're basically going into the core of what makes your research valuable to you? Why are you doing this? Why have you dedicated all these years of your life to doing this? Why have you spent so much time on this idea? So just be yourself, just do, so if you have a big idea, go for it. But what is a big idea? And does a big idea work, right? So if I say that I'm going to use speculative literature to address the big problem of climate change, right? Or address all the problems that are happening in the world right now, that's kind of a big idea, right? Big ideas are not always about whether they work, in the sense that, they have to work at some level, but it's an experiment. A big idea is kind of an experiment. It may work, it may not work. And this is kind of what the high risk, high gain model is. That if you have a really big idea, if it works, you stand to gain a lot. You can actually change your discipline. But the high risk is that it may not work, right? And the ERC is interested in precisely those, that if it works, this is fabulous. If it doesn't work, too bad. And this is where the National Research Councils and the ERC differ, because the National Research Councils are far more concerned about smaller ideas and what works. The ERC is more interested in the big ideas. If it works, you stand to gain a lot. That's the first important thing to remember. And the other thing is also what I was trying to mention earlier, which is going big with idea and small with implementation. And this is also interesting with the ERC. So you can have this really big idea that is going to change everything, right? It's going to change the world. Okay, great, accept it. But even if it doesn't, then the steps that you take during the process will still achieve a lot. And that's what I mean by going small with implementation. So the steps that lead you to addressing the big question, those are also really, really important. And that's why you need to go small with implementation. The other thing that I would kind of like stress here is the radical interdisciplinarity. This is, again, a difference from National Research Councils and something like an ERC. Everyone talks the talk of interdisciplinarity these days. It's the buzzword. Everyone's doing interdisciplinarity. But people are still not really quite open to that, to walking the walk when it comes to interdisciplinarity. And this is one of the big things about the ERC, is that they are open to walking the walk. Like, okay, you say you're going to do radical interdisciplinarity in your project, fine, let's see where it goes, because that's kind of the wellspring of new ideas. So they are open to radical interdisciplinarity. So if you are a scientist who wants to work with an artist, that is an example of a radical interdisciplinarity. But it somehow, of course, also needs to be within the framework of your big idea. That is a given, right? But also think of it this way, that if there is one big puzzle that you have, let's say something like climate change, right? That's one big puzzle. You can't solve all of it, but let's say you want to solve a part of it, and that part involves all of humanity. How would you do it? You cannot do it with one discipline. This is a given. And this is what the ERC very clearly recognizes, that it's not a given that you will be able to address all these problems that you want to address from the limitations of your own discipline. It is also the reason why you would get an ERC grant, because ERC allows you to bring in researchers from different disciplines. It's not funding you, it's funding your PhDs, it's funding your postdocs, it's funding researchers with experiences and expertise that you don't have. And that's how you can build a radical interdisciplinary group. the other side of that is the radical interdisciplinarity, that ERC also wants you to be able to, in a way, change your discipline, right? So if that big one big puzzle is also visible to you from only your discipline, then how would you transform your discipline? So when you're thinking with the idea, when you're thinking about drafting this, that's the other thing to kind of consider, right? The last thing I have put in there is all alone with a whiteboard, or the pleasures of solitude for an introvert. And this is kind of what I do. I work with a whiteboard. I scribble, I scribble, I scribble. I draft ideas, I tear them down, I write them again, and so on, right? So I spent a lot of time with the whiteboard. I spent a lot of time visualizing the different parts of the research. It might work for you. It definitely did work for me. The prep stage is where you actually have a draft, and now you want something else to happen with it, right? So my tip for this is write fast, write a lot, get feedback, and use this kind of an iterative process, right? That you have a draft, you get feedback, and you develop it again, right? So you keep going back and forth, and you keep developing the idea, but feedback is extremely crucial. Two things that I would mention again is, it's your big idea. So be confident about your idea, and don't let anyone get you down. Super important, because there's a lot of naysayers. If you have a really big idea, you will find a lot of naysayers. If you're applying for a grant like the ERC, a lot of people will tell you it can't be done. It can be done. So don't let anyone get you down. Be really confident about your idea, right? But how do you also prep your application? There's a trick to it. So one is looking at other successful applications. You can just Google online and you will find a lot of successful, part B1 and part B2 of successfully funded ERC applications online. Look at those applications, see how they have structured them, see what works in them, and then go from that. Okay? So you don't have to use all those tips, but you will see what works. When you read a lot of these applications, you will begin to see that some of these structuring issues really help. And that's where the implementation part of it comes in. So big idea, implementations, and implementation is something that you can learn. The second question is the hive, as I said. So this is all the hive mind getting feedback, right? So the hive 2 is who to ask for feedback on your idea. Is it your friends? Is it other ERC grantees? Who do you go for? Well, in my case, I went for people, none of whom had ERC grants. I went for people because I was going for a radically interdisciplinary idea. I found friends from all these disciplines. And all these people, whether it's people from architecture and urban planning to history, to cultural history, all these different disciplines, they read my proposal. I shared my proposal with them and they gave me feedback. And it was very important for me to know that these were all people I could actually trust. They were experts in their field. They were people I could actually trust. And the other good thing about them is that I knew that they all liked me, but did not particularly like science fiction, did not particularly like my field. Because I knew that those are the people who would ask the really hard questions, but they wouldn't ask the hard questions because they didn't like me. They would ask the hard questions because there was something in that idea that didn't work for them. So if you're going for radical interdisciplinarity, use the hive, use the friends that you have in different disciplines and work with them. The third part of the hive is who is qualified to give feedback, institutions versus individuals, right? And some institutions, for instance, have their own mechanisms for where they hire these external bodies to read applications and so on and give feedback. So these are institutional arrangements. And then there are also individuals you can work with. So who is qualified to give feedback? I think both are in some ways qualified. Institutions can tell you exactly the institutional limitations, the administrative limitations of your project. So you might have this crazy idea, but they will tell you that, look, we do not have the resources to do this, right? So even with an ERC fund, you need a basic infrastructure in order to pull this off. You may not be able to do it, right? So that kind of feedback is very useful in shaping your application. Feedback from individuals is really about the idea. So they're both qualified, but they're qualified in different ways. And again, to think in terms of iterative design, that you get feedback, you develop, you get feedback, you develop, and you keep going in that kind of a cycle. The last thing is back to the whiteboard, which is the language of visuals. After all that feedback, it's still your idea. Be confident about your idea and don't let anyone get you down. So go back to the whiteboard, go back to the language of visuals, see what works, see what doesn't work. It has to work for you. Anyway, so I did that. I had fantastic feedback from all my friends who hated the application but love me, so it's great. Anyway, got good feedback. Application went to the second round. And then I got to the interview stage. So I had to prepare for the interview. And at that point of time, I had to kind of like start thinking, you know, so what now, you know? So the evaluators so far have only seen your application in that sense. They haven't quite met you. I mean, they have seen your CV and you have some things in there which look good because obviously that's why you are there. But you know, so you have some kind of a researcher profile, and it's the excellence of the idea, as Samrat said earlier, that has really taken you to the second round. So in this second round, then the CV and the person who makes this project happen start to matter. So you take a look at your CV, you know, and say, and there are many different things to this. And for me, it was really like, you know, when I went back and saw my 10-year academic CV and all the books and journal articles and blah, blah, blah that I had done and so on, I began to focus on what really matters. So the CV is not just you, it's the CV is also what matters to you, right? And how it matters to you and how you want to address those questions. So I began to think back almost from scratch as to why I was doing the project I was doing and the sense of purpose, right? So because those things tell you that why you want to do this project, and also why you are the person to do it, right? That this project is not your own combination of experiences and expertise have brought you to this point where you are competent enough to be able to lead a project like this. So why you are the person to do it. I also had very good interview prep in the sense that I got some of the hive back together and got some institutional support and so on, basically to again read through the application and tell me, this doesn't work. You know, this is what they will ask you, right? So they, again, you know, even for the last version of the application, I had them read it and come at me from their different disciplinary perspectives as to what still doesn't work. Because those are the kinds of questions that I was prepping for at the interview, right? And you also have to make this slideshow and presentation, and you have very few minutes, so 5, 7, 10 minutes to present it. In my case, it was a very badly put together slideshow, I think. I mean, the only person who managed to see the slideshow was my partner. And she said, well, yeah, this works. So that was, you know, it was almost last minute. If you have time, think more with the slideshow. In my case, I didn't. You know, next time I apply for an ERC, I will. But for this one, I really didn't have time. So is it all important? A lot of people say yes. It probably is, but that's my experience, which I'm sharing. But I did have a trial presentation and a trial run with institutional support, which was really very useful. So we had kind of a mock interview. You can get your Hive to do a mock interview. This is the final stage. So this is the slide at which I will stop. This is kind of what I did for the interview itself. Woke up in the morning, heard really cheerful, rousing music. I didn't read my proposal again. Look, one of the things to remember is that you are the expert. It's just how it is. And you have spent years, perhaps, or at least several months at the very least on this proposal. You are the expert on this. It's not like you're expecting something that comes out of the blue. Yeah? So instead, listen to some cheerful music. That was what worked for me. I listened to very rousing music from Star Trek, which I really like. And I also wore a Star Trek pin to the interview, which I always wear anyway. So the clothes part of it, whether you go conservative or you go flamboyant, whether you wear a tie or, to tie a tie or not to tie a tie, that is not even a question. It's too hot in there, so don't wear a tie. But, whether you should be conservative or flamboyant, I dressed as I usually do with a Star Trek pin. So I guess that kind of cements nerd credentials for people. So I did that. Yeah, so the thing about the interview is this, that you have to be ready to really listen to the panel. We'll get an insight from Dr. Attad onto the evaluation committee, but you see that the comments that the evaluators have given, because they are also experts in the field, so they have really read your proposal and they have asked the really tough questions. So when you're asked these questions at the interview, because the panel is going to use these questions in order to, test you out, these are not general questions. These are actually very specific, well thought out questions. So be ready to really, really listen. As in any interview, be ready to really listen. Exact phrases, think about that. But be ready to hold your own, because you are getting all these challenging questions. But remember, again, you are the expert. You know how to answer these questions. Pause for a second. Take a sip of that water glass that's in front of you, and then get to it. Think about it. Look at the sky for a few seconds if you have to, and then go and answer that question. So really listen, but be ready to hold your own. You are the expert in this, and they will know. In your presentation, your CV matters. So highlight your achievements also in your presentation, and they might ask you questions from your CV. Then there is also the distinction that I make between the person, the persona, and the personality. And I think all of those kind of come in to the interview. The person is who you are. It's your commitment, all of it. This is what has brought you this far. And there's nothing more to be said for it, right? In that sense. It's who you are as a scientist. If you're an introvert, well, that's your person, but it still represents commitment. Then there is the persona. The persona is what people outside will see, and that's kind of your appearance, how you conduct yourself. So I talk a lot with my hands, as you have noticed. So that's also part of the persona. It's your appearance. If you are gonna wear a Star Trek pin, wear a Star Trek pin. That's who you are. It's how it is. The personality is your passion, and that really shines through. And I think one of the things that a lot of the ERC panelists who are asking you these questions are looking for is the passion, the drive, that you know your subject, you're a total nerd, but you have real passion to do this, because it's a big idea. You have to address this with passion. Last thing before I sign off is that, sure, it's one of the most prestigious grants in the world, but it's your commitment to the idea, right? And your commitment to the idea and work should matter more than the grant. It's not a do or die. You can repeat, you can come back again if you don't get the grant. But this is kind of important for me that to state that it's your commitment to the idea and the work, and that's more than any grant can give you. A grant is a very useful step towards that direction, but it's not a do or die, which is why you could probably wear a Star Trek pin to an interview, right? Like, okay, if I don't get the grant, doesn't matter, because this is who I am. I'm still gonna do this work. So I'm really grateful to the ERC for funding this crazy research. And if you have any questions, just put them up. And over to you, Samrat. Thank you.
Bodhi, thanks a lot. Great presentation. And I don't think we can find anyone being a better advocate for this ERC grant than you. Be authentic, believe in yourself, dare to be crazy. That's what the ERC is looking for, people with crazy idea, with research ideas which are, creating new horizons in the research landscape. And I think it was very well to listen to you. And I think most of our participants really, I think, can identify also with what you said, I would like now to pass over the mic to Maria. Maria, this will be also very valuable for our audience now to hear from the evaluator side. How is it to be on the other side and get all these applications and proposals, and how does the evaluation process look like? Thank you, Maria.
Okay, so thank you for this invitation to address your participants of this webinar. I have served now for 8 years as an evaluator at the ERC, with, of course, every other year being on a panel. And in the last round, I was a panel chair for the SH2 panel. So I've read a lot of proposals, and I could see some, and I could relate very much to some of the things which what he was talking about in his presentation. So I've prepared these slides just to give sort of some basic understanding of what is expected, but also the perspective or the views and the expectations of the evaluators during the the process of evaluating the applications. So to start with, I thought, the principles, these have been mentioned. The issues of excellence is very, very important. I guess Bodhi called it crazy stuff. Well, I think, yes, we've had some crazy proposals, which the ERC panel did actually like a lot. I think the high risk, high gain is very, very important for the ERC. Then there are certain principles, of course, of transparency. So, of course, the whole process of review and evaluation is extremely open and very clearly described. The fairness and impartiality for the evaluation of proposals. This is all throughout the process, and the evaluation and the panel members are very much aware of these principles. The confidentiality of the information and the documents that are received by the ERC, but also which are handled by the evaluation panel. The efficiency and the speed. There is a timeline for the proposals to be evaluated, and that is an important timeline for the ERC. It's a timeline which is set a year ahead. So when evaluators are contracted, they know exactly the dates by which all the process has to be considered. The ethics consideration, of course, it's a very important principle for ERC. And the research integrity considerations. You need to ensure that in your thought process, all of these principles are very clear and very well thought out, so that you don't you don't get too many questions about these such basic principles, which the ERC continuously looks for. So you've seen this. The key considerations, of course, are the timing, the grant type, and the rules. You need to make sure you are extremely aware of all these key considerations and the scientific excellence. I mean, I was pleased to hear Bodhi talking about how long it took him to actually come up with the idea, and there was a process in it. But it does take time to, come up with an excellent proposal. And so do take time. Of course, the timing of the ERC calls are public, so you can easily gauge how much time you can dedicate and how much time is required to basically hit the nail on the head when it comes to scientific excellence, because that is the only criterion for evaluation that is told to the evaluators. Okay, so the experts that are identified by the ERC, this is a process which is handled completely by the agency. They select experts and ensure that there is gender balance, geographic diversity, and that there is regular rotation. So you will not find the same member panels every year. They are rotated every 2 years. They also have an end process. So I finished my panel contributions now. And then, of course, the expert names are actually published at the end of the process. Only the panel chair is known at the beginning of the process, but the expert name is only published at the end of the process. And that might also be something to look out for. You know, who are the people that the ERC is actually using as experts? Because it might also have an impact on the type of questions you get, especially if you're dealing with interdisciplinarity. Or multidisciplinary approaches. There's a very important rule that you cannot contact the experts or the panel members during the whole process, because the risk is, of course, that the ERC rejects the proposal. But there is a possibility for applicants to request the exclusion of experts, of course, by specifying the reasons for that exclusion. The evaluation criteria covers 2 main elements. So the first one is the actual research project. So there is a part A and a part B. And this is where basically you have the opportunity to explain your big idea, I like the word crazy, so I'm gonna adopt it as well, the crazy idea that you have. And then there is, of course, the element of the principal investigator, which is given quite a lot of importance, because if you have an excellent idea, if you have a crazy idea, the ERC will look at the principal investigator, the experience, and then, of course, in the interview, the persona, the person, the passion, all the things that Bodhi has mentioned, to convince itself that it can actually deliver it. We did have very good ideas, very exciting, very high-risk ideas. But then when the principal evaluator is taken into consideration, you just start thinking, is it crazy or crazy excellent? Is the person able to deliver that crazy idea? And you come up with all these questions on the nexus between sort of what is written in the research proposal and what is the delivery by the principal investigator. And then, of course, the research proposal in terms of the description is divided between the groundbreaking nature, so you need to be able to explain that, and the potential impact of the project, and the scientific approach. So if we look at the questions that the evaluators get, they get for the evaluation process, as you can see, there are very few questions which the evaluators are asked to review. And under groundbreaking nature and impact is, to what extent does the proposed research address important challenges? To what extent are the objectives ambitious and beyond the state of the art? I've seen a question in the Q&A or the chat which said that questioned whether it was a continuation of the research. And I think you need to be careful here in terms of this particular evaluation question, going beyond the state of the art, the novel concepts or approaches. Is it a development between or across disciplines? And to what extent is the proposed research high risk, high gain? And it's a very important requirement. I'm not saying that all of the research grants applications actually have this, and it is something which is sometimes disappointing. Oh, it's not really high risk, is it? It's taking minimum risk. Okay, I mean, it's successful, but I think if an idea or a proposal is exciting enough, then the high risk and the high gain needs to be highlighted very, very clearly. Because this is what attracts the attention of the evaluators primarily. And then, of course, the scientific approach, and this is where probably most of the more difficult questions come out in the interview, because the evaluation panel wants to make sure that they understand that the scientific approach is feasible. And so if they have questions about whether you'll be able to achieve this or how you are able to achieve this. I mean, the interview technically, like any interview, is an opportunity for the grant holder or the applicant really at that stage to, show off what they're thinking. The application is restrictive to a certain extent. When you have such an excellent idea, the application seems like a straitjacket, not being able to say everything. So the interview is very, very important. And, you can have the best slides for your presentation, but really it's the Q&A after the slides. I mean, the slides is a very short presentation of this excellent idea. So if you think the research application is a straitjacket, the slides is even more, because it's just, a few minutes. But the questions are very important. And these are the kind of questions: the feasibility of the scientific approach, whether the working arrangements are appropriate, the novel methodologies. You'll get questions if you propose novel methodologies as what are the risks involved in it, and how do you mitigate some of those risks. And of course, the PI's commitment, which I think is very important. The evaluation panel is always looking at how committed the PI is to the project, and a low commitment percentage, because you're asked to write what is the percentage time you're going to sort of dedicate at the proposal. I think I would tend to encourage people to commit to their projects. They are your projects, as Bodhi said, they are your projects. And I think the high commitment is a sign of that ownership. And then, of course, we have the section on the principal investigator. So the ability to conduct groundbreaking research, the evidence of creative independent thinking, whether the PI has the required scientific expertise and capacity. So these things have to come out in your CV. It is not just a list of what I've done. It's what I've done, yes, and that is your CV, your list of publications and all, but then a description of these 3 points. What are your abilities? What is it that you have done that shows that ability? Where have you been creative and independent in your thinking? So it's important that these issues are highlighted in the application. And of course, for starting grant and for consolidator grant, you have differences in the expectations of the evaluation panel. In the starting grant, of course, we're looking at rising stars. That is what we're looking for, rising stars in research. In consolidator grant is more established PIs. And then, of course, at advanced, you're talking of, really the big guys of research. But don't let the expectation scare you to a certain extent. We've had very good ideas with PIs that were very good, but still were at the initial processes of their career. This is not your 2 years after your PhD, and therefore you don't think you're fit. And I don't think it's a question of how many years after your PhD, really and truly. It's the individual, the passion, the idea, and the science. So the evaluation process, if we look, these are some points which I've made. The peer review of projects is carried out by the panel of independent scientists, operating under a chair, who is also an independent expert, proposed by the Scientific Council. So it's a completely independent panel made up of independent researchers. Each proposal is reviewed by at least 3 reviewers who draw up each of them an individual assessment report. The panel assessment is carried out to ensure coherence and consistent treatment of all proposals. So you get each proposal gets discussed within the panel, and the judgment of proposals, including the ranking, is based on both the individual reports and the panel discussion. So in the second round, when there is the interview, the panel discussion, I mean, you do the interview in front of the whole panel. So the panel does discuss each and every single applicant. The interviews generally include the questions from the 3 panel members that would have evaluated the proposal, but of course, nothing stops from the other panel members to actually ask further questions. Choosing the right panel is critical. Do not add panels to your proposal in the hope that it fits somewhere. The ERC does its best to fit proposals and to be fair on proposals by fitting them into the preferred panels, or if there are many panels, to fit it into the best panel. But I think the clearer it is in the applicant's mind in terms of which panel fits the best, I think that is the most successful formula, basically. And you can find the different panels here, you know, easily in terms of the subject topics. I'm not saying that your proposal will fit perfectly into one of them. It's almost very difficult, especially when you're dealing with interdisciplinary research, but it certainly helps to narrow and focus. So what is it about writing a good proposal? The proposal needs to focus on a fundamental problem, ideally an important challenge with potential groundbreaking impact, as we've heard before. Having said that, the problems needs to be written clearly for both expert and non-experts in the panel to understand. Within the expert panel that is selected by the ERC, there might not be the actual expertise in your specific field. Or there might be 1 out of a whole panel, or 2 out of the whole panel. So you need to write clearly and express clearly what you think are important messages in your proposal. Being an expert, of course, you should clearly write why you think the challenge is worth funding, including a very good review of the state of the art and the potential outputs and limitations. If it is high risk, high gain, the risks need to be mentioned very, very clearly. And the state of the art might also be in the approach to the problem. So think about the methodology very, very well. We had a lot of proposals where the idea is brilliant, you know, the concept, the research questions, but then the execution was not so much. For various reasons, I would believe, partly due to necessary expertise when you're dealing with interdisciplinary applications sometimes. You know, one of the sort of methodological slumps happen in parts of this interdisciplinary approach. So you need to make sure that it is well structured, it is clear, and it comes up from the various disciplines. And if you're doing interdisciplinary work, the integration needs to be very, very clear. In your wider description of the proposal, be clear but thorough with the description of the objectives and the methods and the resources required. The work package structures, if you're using work packages, needs to be very well thought of. The integration between various tasks, remember, these are large grants. And so there are proposals that have almost individual and self-standing sort of work packages in terms of deliverables, you know, because you have a PhD, you want to attach a PhD to that work package. But in the end, it is one project, it has one aim, and you know, it has an impact, and you need to make sure that there is a good integration between the various tasks. ERC grants, of course, are not going to support just a number of PhDs or separate research tasks. It needs to be integrated. It needs to fulfill an aim. I repeat again the issue about risks, because I think this is very important and sometimes not very clear in the proposals, and the proposed feasible mitigation measures. As was mentioned earlier, the ERC does take risks with high risk, high gain projects. And it is true that even if the panel does not see the actual outcome because it is such a high risk project, it does not mean that it doesn't get funded. Sometimes the craziest proposals get funded because of the potential impact. However, in that potential impact, the risks are very well known, both to the individual and to the panel, because they have been written and included in the proposal. So make sure that there is this good understanding of how risky this proposal is, what the great potential could be, and how you intend to mitigate for any risks if something goes wrong. Your big data doesn't come through, your field work fails. There are various issues which can come up in the research. And of course, justify well the resources requested in the budget. We've had along the years proposals where the panel sort of questioned some of the resources which were being demanded by the applicant. The ERC then, of course, goes through the process of checking these resources with the applicant. But I think a good budget helps to convince the evaluators that you know what you're doing, basically. The panel and the evaluators look for good PIs in terms of their experience and publications, but also in the skills in managing researchers, effective dissemination, experience in participating projects, and also participation in academic events and networking. The more you have of these skills, the more you are able to show them off as skills which you transfer to your ERC project. Make sure you highlight the major achievements, preferably those made independently from others, even though, of course, you tell me, well, I'm 2 years after my PhD. It's not like I have had much time to do that. No, maybe you wouldn't have had the time to do that from others, but you certainly have to showcase what are your strengths in the application. Ensure that in highlighting the expertise, the PI does not give the impression that the proposal is just a continuation of ongoing research. This is very important. If you are proposing ideas and you have, of course, done research in the field, because the ERC looks for excellence, it cannot just be your next step in your, following your PhD. It needs to, be, quite a large step up, because we are looking for excellence. We're looking at major impact. And so a continuation of what has been going on is not particularly a good idea. And if there is a collaboration, this is very, very important. You need to describe very, very clearly what the role of the PI and the outputs, which will be funded by the ERC and which will be attributed to the ERC grant, are clearly written in the proposal. Sometimes we get these proposals where it's unclear whether there is a collaboration between a PI and another researcher, or the PI within the institution and another institution. And it's not very clear what will be attributed in terms of output to the ERC grant. And so will the other PI benefit from the outputs? Will the other institution benefit from the output? I think these need to be very clearly described. Otherwise, you raise a lot of questions in the heads of the evaluators. And then there's the interview. As I said before, the interview is an opportunity to add value to your proposal. It needs to have a presentation which is very focused on the evaluation criteria. So what is the project and does it address important challenge, the ambition, the scientific approach, the potential impact, and why the PI. So here I reiterate what Bonnie had said before. Because the interview is very short, even though I am told people think it's endless, but it's very short. It's a very short interview and you get very little time in actual fact to stand in front of a panel, which is, I mean, I can only imagine how daunting it must be to sort of stand up in front of 15 people all ready to look at you, ask questions, and all you have is a few minutes. So keep your answers short, so that the more questions, the panel can ask all its questions, because the last thing you want is to get 2 questions and then realize that there were panel members who did not manage to get their questions answered, which of course makes them uncomfortable and not ready to give a judgment. So try to keep your answers short, and the more questions you are able to answer, the more informed or the better informed is the panel. To make the right decision about your proposals. So to conclude, the process of applying for an ERC grant has to be seen as an opportunity. It's an opportunity to learn about yourself, to learn about your work. And you've heard, from the previous speaker, it's a long process. It takes time to create the proposal. So it's time which you learn about yourself, you learn about your work, and you need to appreciate that, even if the grant doesn't come through. And then, of course, you can reapply, and you can also use that experience elsewhere. Diligence is necessary because competition is particularly big. Okay, so this is something which is a reality. There is a lot of applications, and the focus on excellence. Be thorough in the preparation of your proposal and do not leave anything to chance. We've had applicants that sort of thought, let me be flamboyant and sort of, push this idea, this crazy idea. But if you're not thorough, the evaluators will feel that you're not ready yet. And sometimes proposals are not funded because they're not ready yet. And the PIs are encouraged to reapply. Be prepared to answer specialist, but also generalist questions about your proposal. As I said, the panel members have different expertise, as you can see when you go and see panel members from previous years. And so you will have very specialized questions, but you might also have generalist questions. And I think most important, if you're doing this and you're particularly in the starting grant, as I see it, I think it's important to enjoy and learn from the process, because it is an experience. It is a huge effort. It is applying for the best, I think, for the best in the world, as been said before. So you need to make sure you enjoy and learn from the process, because even if it fails, I think it's definitely something which you'll carry with you in your academic careers. So thank you for listening, and good luck to everyone.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you so much. You have some references as well.
Yes,
right?
yes, yeah. These are the stuff that I've used for the presentation. So I thought
Perfect.
I had.
And we will make those available, of course, the slides of Maria. And let me really congratulate you for an excellent presentation, very well structured, very detailed, an excellent overview about the evaluation process, and I think very useful and insightful tips for potential applicants. I think overall this was a great session. We also stretched it over the planned time, but I think it's totally worth it to go beyond time, because this is really a grant scheme which is really great to get, and the more information, the more time our participants can have with you guys, I think the better it is. So we are now going into the Q&A session, and I will start with a couple of questions which are for Vivek, but also I think Maria could come in those. The first question, Vivek, is if my field is economics, am I still eligible to be part of the ICSR agreement, or is that something outside of that? Vivek? I think we just lost Vivek for a second. The others are with me still, right? Yeah, okay, okay. Vivek, are you able to hear us?
Now I can. Sorry, I got disconnected. Sorry.
So Vivek, if a researcher is in the field of economy, is he still eligible to apply through the ICSSR EU implementing agreement?
Yes, the economics is a part of ICSSR's area of scope, but the condition that the researcher should be beneficiary of ICSSR program at present. So those are the only eligible researchers who will be benefiting from the ICSSR's program.
Okay. Another question was regarding the minimum requirements to apply for the starting grant. As we have seen the slides of both Vivek and Maria, it's saying PhD plus 2 years of research experience. How strict is that guideline? Is it possible to apply directly after the PhD for the ERC starting grant?
No. You have to abide by the guidelines very strictly. And these are listed very, very clearly. If you are still not within the 2 years, what I suggest is that you start working on your grant so that the minute you are eligible, you put in your application.
True. Yeah. Okay. That's very good to clarify that. And then we had a question regarding fundings. Is it possible to also have like third-party funding for the project? Like, can it be in addition to the ERC grant, can there be another funding agency who can chip in? Or is it possible to apply for dual funding?
There are instances where the applicant, because in the application form you have to list other funding projects that you have and that you have applied. And in the funding proposal, you have to list the relationship of that funding to the ERC proposal. So if there are questions whether of course, double funding is not acceptable. And proposals include sometimes the declaration by the applicant that if the ERC grant is given, then this application will be forfeited. So it is part of the application process where you have to declare what applications you have submitted, what applications you have won, and the relationship with the ERC proposal.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. Another question, I think, Vivek, this goes to you. So how is it for PhD students or postdoc students who are recruited for the ERC project? Do they have to be based in Europe or can they work also from within India?
No, actually, they have to work. So normally the ERC principal investigators advertise the PhD and postdoc positions. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, yes.
So the PhD and postdoc positions are advertised by the the ERC principal investigator, and the ERC also, the Euraxess also publishes that. Yes, it is mentioned in the application of the PhD where the PhD grantees will be working. Normally, it is worked in the European lab. 99% what I observed in European lab only.
Okay, good. So that's very important to clarify that. A few questions to Bodhi as well. Already, Maria was taking up that question about how much has the proposal been related to your previous work? Like, has it been a continuation, or have you been presenting proposals something totally new in your proposal, Bodhi?
So this is interesting because it's kind of okay. So let me put it this way: my doctoral work and previous work was actually on late 19th and early 20th century materials. So there's many levels of difference. So that was on that. Whereas what I'm working on for the ERC is completely 21st century. So it's temporally very distant. it's also very different in terms of the scope of the project, right? So it's like, because you're an expert in one field and you're working on developing that field. But one of the reasons why you want a grant like the ERC is precisely because you can see a larger idea. For me, it was like, so let's say I work on India, right? But I know that, the problems that I'm trying to talk about are problems that concern the global South. So whether it's Latin America or China or Africa, that's the problem that I'm trying to address, right? So there's a huge difference also in terms of scale, right? And that's one of the justifications that you can have for bringing in a grant like the ERC, because you say, look, I don't read Spanish or Portuguese, I don't read Chinese, I need people to do that. And that's like a clear justification for why you want to apply for an ERC, because you can see this idea, but the only way you can get to anything, only way you can get to any results is if you have a team like that, right? So there's a very clear kind of, I would say a clear kind of progression, but also a very radical break at the same time, if it makes sense. One very quick thing that I will add here, and this is kind of what the ERC, so Vivek, you mentioned very briefly the proof of concept kind of grant, but one of the things that are kind of useful to think with is maybe you have tested out a very small part of your proposal already, right? Maybe you have held a small workshop. Maybe you have made some international connections, right, of people who are working in these fields, and those matter. So you could say that, look, I have at a very, very small scale, I have kind of seen that this can work, but at a very, very small scale, I really need to go big. So that's another argument. So it's many different levels at which you can relate to your existing work, but also jump way ahead, light years ahead. So there's no real connection, but I'm still a science fiction researcher in that sense. So yeah.
Okay, great, thank you, excellent. Another question, Bodhi, and I think also maybe Vivek and Maria could come in here. How to choose a host institution in Europe? Like if you don't have a collaboration at the moment, like any tips, how to find a host institution to apply for the ERC grant? Who wants to take that?
I think let Bodhi take it because he had hands-on experience before, because mine will be more technical. He will give the insight actually how he had selected it.
So actually, I have very little insight on this because I was already at the University of Oslo so I have been at the university for quite a while, and I have really the best department. They've supported all this process so much. So I can't really say how you would choose a host department, but I know a couple of people who are applying, and my tips to them have been more on the lines of see what research is being done over there. Why is this a good fit for the kind of work that you want to jump to, right? So if you're working, let's say on a field, let's say music theory, right? So, well, this university has the best music research lab. Justification for why move to Europe, why work at this different university, and then build connections from there and hope they support your application too, because there has to be that. Thanks.
Good advice, good advice.
Yeah, no. Okay, we take a few more questions before we conclude the webinar, and then I think these are questions primarily directed to Maria. Maria, we heard high risk, high gain, and it has been repeatedly said, it's great to take risk, but also evaluators comment that it has to be doable, right? So how to strike the right balance between high risk and also propose something which is in the end also doable?
Well, we've had proposals which talk about high risk. but then their methodology is weak. And so they do not convince the evaluators that they can potentially achieve huge impacts. I think in looking at the way you present the proposal is more at making sure to convince the evaluators of your skill, also in writing the methodology, of course, that it can be done. As I said, there were proposals which were so high risk, high gain that even the panel thought, oh, this is, we don't know whether it would work. If it works, it's great, but we don't know whether it works. But we're convinced that what is written in the application sort of gives you confidence that the PI can actually deliver this. So I don't think it's a question of writing that it's doable. I think it's being honest about the potential impact that the project can have, the methods that are clearly stated with all their risks and their mitigation, and basically convince the evaluators that if this is successful, this is the impact. And I know that this could happen because I am convinced that I can do this, this, and this, and that. And what is this, this, and this, and that are very clear and very well explained methodological approaches. Sometimes the framework is missing, sometimes the theoretical grounding is missing in proposals, which is a pity because I am pretty sure they're there. It's just they're not written well in the application form. And so when you put together the understanding of the state of the art of the individual application form, that already starts giving you some confidence that the person knows what he's doing. You then think of the impact, which they've described very well, and then come to the methodology, and you have a sound methodological approach, which even if it doesn't work, it will fail, and it will fail with success because you will be able to take something out of that methodology and say, well, we tried this way and it didn't work for reasons. So I think it's not a question of making it doable. I think it's convincing the evaluators that it's a high risk project and that high risk can be, with uncertain outcomes, but still be successful.
Yeah, good. Thank you for that. Another question was, it is mentioned that one should or expected to move beyond one's discipline. And the participant who posed this question said that when it was done in her or his proposal, she says, we got comments from evaluators that the researcher is not experienced enough in the new discipline. So the question now is here, how can one tackle this issue?
Yeah.
At the one hand, it's expected to move beyond, but then apparently the evaluator said that the researcher is not experienced enough in the new discipline.
A common mistake that is done, I find in proposals, is that in what is termed moving beyond the discipline, which I'm not sure that it's really such a priority, really, because if you're well grounded in your discipline and you have an excellent idea to rattle or shake that discipline, then you should go for it. But if you are moving beyond your discipline, you need to make sure that you have a network of, a network of experts in your team. And so we've had proposals that would suggest, I'm an engineer, and then you would have a proposal which looks at qualitative research. And then you start wondering and methodologies which are really, really qualitative and come from the social sciences. And the evaluation panel sort of questions how can an engineer really move into these without getting appropriate support. And so in the proposal, for example, the applicant does not put in the expertise required to tackle particular aspects of the proposal. And all of a sudden you start realizing that you have an expert which is claiming to be doing this and this, which are outside the field without the proper support. And the proper support can come from a board of stakeholders, or support from other academics from different fields, or basically by listing the different experts that will be involved at PhD and postdoc level within the project. So it's not difficult to go beyond the discipline, but you have to be realistic in convincing the evaluators that you will be able to deliver. You cannot, I mean, I'm a social scientist. I cannot be claiming to, go and construct, huge data mining models and simulations, because it will not be credible.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for that, Maria. And I think we take the last two questions, because I think we have to come to an end. Unfortunately, I think we could go on for more question and answers, but let me take the last two now. Like one participant posed this question, he or she had some research interruptions in her CV. And what is the best way to address that? Maybe it could be because of pregnancy, or one took a timeout for personal, private, family reasons. So how to address that in the CV then, or in the application?
There are maternity clauses in the guidelines. So if you see the rules, parental leave is actually excluded. So you can actually add your research breaks to the amount of years that you calculate post-PhD. So those are all in the rules, yeah.
It's important to go through these guidelines. Last question, which I found very interesting, was, does the ERC also consider industry-focused proposals that can solve real-world problems, or does it prefer grant futuristic ideas only? Are there any evaluators also from the private sector, from the industry as well?
No, generally the panelists are academic, and I've never come across an industry proposal, primarily because I think I'm from the social sciences. Maybe this is something which the engineering panels would consider, but again, having the focus or the main criteria for evaluation being excellence, I don't think anyone should stop any proposal which has a grand idea. And if it's an industry-focused idea and it's grand, then it's excellent still. But it has to be grounded in theory. It has to come from research. This is very important. The theoretical grounding, the state of the art. It's I think it's important.
I hear a bell ringing in somebody's background. So it's actually, I take it as a sign. Maria, it's yours. Yeah, I take it as a natural sign to come to an end to this very exciting, interesting webinar, as I said earlier. And let me thank you again, all three of you, Bodhi, Maria, and Vivek, for joining and giving your expertise, view, and tips to our attendees. Thank you to all who were listening in, and also for your patience that we stretched it a bit over the planned time. As I said, the recording of this webinar will be made available to you shortly, plus the presentations. And also, of course, you can contact the presenters. Their email is also included in the presentation. So if you have any more questions, you can also address them to us. Thank you so much, all of you. Wishing you a nice afternoon or evening now here in India. And we hope that we will see many of you applying for this excellent research grant. Thank you so much. Bye to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Bye.